On this next screen, you can see that we have two techniques that we're using. So when we would have clients come in for pain and mobility restrictions, we use the we use the weighted tuning forks right on the body in what we call vibrational fascia release technique, or VFRT. This is something that we already have vibrational therapists throughout the world, and we have trainers throughout the world. This is where we get a lot of our funding in for our ability to be able to provide VCT training to you. So we want to make sure that you understand that we have two different parts here. So you will find times where I reference VFRT that, let's say, for example, you're working with Lucy and she has Parkinson's, and we would want to use one technique to make sure that the muscles, the pain involved with certain symptoms associated with that disease would be resolved through one method, but there's still the timing. When we have Parkinson's clients, there's some things that we have to do afterwards that we would continue doing rehabilitation to make sure that the gait is right. Once we actually get communication flowing again, then there's VCT would be that follow-on training. Another example would be if she just had stroke paralysis, we can get through VFRT, we can get her moving again by removing the restrictions. But after the restrictions are removed, I'm sure that you're aware that most stroke patients, that they have to go through physical therapy and learn how to walk again or learn how to move again. Not only is there the atrophy of the muscles, but then there's also the timing. You have to remap things in the brain. You have to remap the timing as well. And that's what VCT is for. So just keep that in mind, that we actually have two together. They really are a package for us. And I know that you may come into this and only have VCT, and that's fine. You may have your own methods for taking care of the pain and mobility restrictions. But we want to make sure that you understand that when a client comes in, that you're not using these unweighted tuning forks in a manner to try to force some other type of healing to resolve pain. Even though she might leave here with some resolved pain, but that's not our focus on this particular session. There's better ways, there's faster ways, there's more efficient ways of working through these particular sessions. So make sure that you separate the two techniques that we have. A lot of our therapists make sure they get training in both areas, and you can take the training in either order. So one of the things that we learned with chronobiology and the timing systems of the body is that these clocks, and I'm not just talking about, of course, that circadian clock, but there's also other timings as well. The auditory system has its own timing. Our visual system has its own timing. And then you have motor control timing throughout the entire body. That again would be firing of our muscles through the motor control system. And then what was the consequence of that? Did that muscle move? Did that joint move as far as it needed to? Did that muscle do the job? Do I need more? Do I need to compensate? This is what the brain's thinking all the time. And that's where you start to get this jitteriness, or you can even have tremors, or how you have restless leg syndrome and those sorts of things. That all has to do with timing. Now, what's making that timing messed up? It could be degenerative axons, where, like in MS, the wrappings of that axon starts to degenerate. So now what the brain thinks is supposed to be the time it takes for your nerve ending to say, hey, my joint or part of my body is here now that you've moved it to. By the time the feedback loop gets up to the brain, it's there at a time that the brain wasn't expecting. So it doesn't know that this is the consequence of a sensor feeding back to the brain. that's the consequence of the movement that I just sent out there. There's where you start getting what we call short cycling in automation industry, where I've seen short cycling when I was in robotics, where a robotic arm might do the same thing. There's actually a tremor associated in a robotic arm. When I worked for a Fortune 500 company teaching building automation, ventilation, air conditioning, and fire control, and alarm systems, security systems, they all had these same problems with short cycling, where the feedback mechanism wasn't working correctly, and the timing that involves sending that signal back to the brain, that the device that was being activated that needed the feedback signal to be correct, you would actually get this short cycling where you would hear things buzzing or clicking. You may have heard that yourself in your ventilation system, where a duct might actually just start moving in place like this. Our muscles do the same thing. We might feel jittery or nervousness. Sometimes that has to do with timing being off. And then we may have the lack of a muscle moving the way that it needs to, and the brain just not knowing where it's at. A lot of research has been done in understanding of our nervous system because of things like phantom limbs. So when we started learning all we could about limbs that were no longer there, there's where we really understood how the brain deals with things that we've mapped out our body. Our brain really needs a mapping system to predict where everything already is, so that you can make these split-second movements whenever your thought, or even whether it's a reflex action, which doesn't even involve the brain, that your body automatically knows what to do whenever the thought arises to move your hand or to take a step. Even steps have patterns associated to them, and there's pattern-based cells. There's central pattern generators in your spine that controls the walking gait patterns. If you're walking uphill or walking downstairs or dancing and skipping while you're walking, how your hands move when you're walking. That's a pattern that has to move multiple parts of your body, all to stay in synchronization with each other. This all has to do with chronotherapy, chronobiology, and it's all something that we focus on during our two main protocols, because she has an audio system in her head, so we deal with vibration. Specifically, we're talking about mechanical vibration now. So that is what this tuning fork is providing. So we made sure that the things that we do with her body to help her heal are things that are parts of her body and sensors in her body that will take the vibration here and use it in the body. Auditory system uses vibration, mechanical vibration coming off of the tuning forks. And in her body, the sensors that are based off of vibration that are feeding back space, time, and qualities about the outside external environment, make sure that all that information gets fed back correctly, and that we have the ability to reset clocks. So the only thing that her brain knows about the outside environment is where things are in time, because we have things pressing against us, we have vibrations coming in, we have heat coming in, cold. When we step on things, when we touch things, we have sensors, touch sensors in our skin, under our feet, everywhere in our body. If you think about it, most of the special senses, hearing, smell, taste, visual, a lot of the special senses are all built in the head. The rest of the body takes care of the touch sensors, and they're really designed to tell the brain, the areas of the brain, where is it and what's going on with the external environment. And we take advantage of the vibration-based sensors throughout your body. And there's this thing called a Zeitgeber. And a Zeitgeber is, the meaning of Zeitgeber is time giver. And it's really meaning that the brain and the clocks throughout the body, the different cells and tissue that need very specific timing, how does it change timing with what it's currently doing? How does it know? How do those particular cells know that something's changing in the environment? So here's one of those aspects that you might need to think differently from what you've learned. Not all cells can change their timing based off of new vibration or new input. Not all input happens to be vibration, but it is some form of vibration usually. But we get new input from some sensor. Our body sensors have to be the eyes, ears, and feeling of our external environment. Otherwise, nothing gets updated. We do have internal sensors where one clock will set itself to the other clock. That would be called endogenous. And then we have these things called exogenous or external sensors. They're called Zeitgebers. They're the time givers that we can take external environment and update the timing of those clocks. We can adjust those clocks and synchronize them. And we usually think of the biggest Zeitgeber is the sun or lights or different things in our environment. Even as simple as lying down at night to go to sleep, behavioral patterns when you eat at certain times, and there are certain things that might trigger if they are repetitive and oscillating, rhythmic things in our external environment have to go through sensors here throughout her body, which updates the brain. So these Zeitgebers are the sensory system that allows your brain to permanently change these time rhythmic cells. And I say the brain, but actually there's things throughout your entire body, in your organs, in your muscles. There are different tissue that need certain timings in order to react appropriately and operate efficiently. So as we take our tuning forks and we hold the tuning fork over the body, we are taking the external sensors, which I'm going to talk about here in a minute. That's feeding back information to her brain. Where is this part of her body in space? Where is it in time? So that the body can know how long it takes for that impulse to get all the way up to the brain to where it's wired in the brain. And then the auditory system is the main system in the head, called a special sense. And we can actually do things with tracking and with binaural to be able to affect the inside of the skull. So you can see on the screen that we use two main protocols. We're going to teach you both of them, and both can be used at the same time within a session. So a typical session would be the person coming in, and within 45 minutes to an hour, we would work through a brain protocol, which we're going to show you in videos, and then you would use a full body protocol. These are things where you can use the same exact protocols over and over and over again. Then in follow-on training, more advanced training, we're going to get into things where you would focus on very specific protocols for, let's say, stroke rehabilitation or gait rehabilitation or things that muscle related, where you may do additional protocols specific to the way that the body works with rehabilitation of those certain conditions. But for right now, the brain and the body, we're covering all of our bases here, and these are things that can be done in every session. You take care of the pain and mobility. They come back for these sessions, and it really helps to be able to maintain what you're doing with things that might come back because or take longer to rehabilitate a person with certain movement or mobility conditions. And then there's the cognitive part of it as well, to whether you can keep that person's cognitive processes flowing correctly because of the timing that you're focusing on.